Welcome to Syntax. Today, we have a really good one. We're talking to Glauber Costa about Turso and SQLite. It's a distributed SQLite platform that is really just getting a lot of attention from a lot of developers who've tried it. So we're going to be diving into distributed databases in general. We're going to be talking about SQLite and why people are using it these days, and a little bit. It's kind of a little bit of a glow up recently in terms of like its public perception. It feels like. So we're going to be talking all about that and more. With me, as always, is Wes Boss. What's up, Wes?
Hey, not much. Excited to talk about SQLite and Turso and everything. The dudes from Drizzle had good things to say about you. Probably half because they like it and half because you. I think you sponsor the development of Drizzle quite a bit.
Yeah. First of all, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been a fan of the podcast, and we were in fact the first corporate sponsors of Drizzle when they were just getting started. We're very happy with the partnership. We're very happy with them, and I think it's safe to say they'll correct me if they disagree here, but. It's not just a financial thing. Like, we really believed in what they're doing, and very early on, and I'm happy to go into more details there as well. But like very early on, we had this issue in which people were very excited about the idea of Turso. That's when we were releasing our private beta. But the one thing that we got from the private beta users is this is really hard to consume because it doesn't work with the ORMs, right? Mm-hmm. And then we had this Drizzle was just popping out in the scene at the moment. And we really had that symbiotic win-win relationship in which, hey, if you guys can support us, we will be happy to sponsor you. And look, this is how the relationship started, but we've been very impressed with what they're doing. I think they've been very impressed with what we're doing. And, we keep sponsoring. We want to keep helping. We understand that they're not a company. They are a group of dudes from Ukraine.
Yeah.
Which makes the whole thing even more impressive, right, Justin?
Totally. Yeah. We just talked about that. Cool. Well, let's talk about Turso. What is Turso?
Turso is a managed version, managed offering of a fork of SQLite called libSQL. So this is, the elevator pitch, and then we go into the details of that. But Turso started with us. We had this company that was creating a product that was not a database, but it was a product that used the database like many other products and still in the data infrastructure space. And we used SQLite very heavily. And just one day we decided to fork SQLite. And the reason we decided to fork SQLite is that we figure that SQLite is a great database. We love SQLite, but to use it as a production database for server workloads. I mean, SQLite has traditionally been used in appliances, mobile devices, and your phone probably has like 10,000 SQLite databases, if not more. My toaster likely runs SQLite, and your Apple Watch runs SQLite. I mean, it's everywhere. We were seeing a lot of people trying to run this on the server, us included. We were using this in our product. And we weren't really happy with the solutions that existed at the time to run SQLite as a server-side production database. We felt like we had the technical capabilities to make the changes needed to SQLite to make that happen. Becca and I worked in the Linux kernel for 10 years, each of us, Becca being my co-founder. Wow. We then wrote a database from scratch called ScyllaDB later, and in a company that we joined, that is a database focused on the NoSQL petabyte scale workloads. So we looked at the code and said, hey, look, I mean, just we can, it's really a bunch of changes that we can make to this database that would allow us to run this on par, if not better, than Postgres, MySQL, Mongo, and any other offering, really. But SQLite, the project, doesn't take contributions from anybody. So we decided to fork it. That's how the open source project was built. And then we built a managed service around it, right? Which is what Turso is today.
And if you want to see all of the errors in your application, you'll want to check out Sentry at sentry.io/syntax. You don't want a production application out there that, well, you have no visibility into in case something is blowing up and you might not even know it. So head on over to sentry.io/syntax. Again, we've been using this tool for a long time and it totally rules. All right. So do you have a lot of folks using libSQL as just libSQL without, using Turso at all?
I think it depends on what you mean by how lots, because SQLite is used by potentially trillions of devices, and so we're nowhere near that scale. But there are a couple of companies that we know of that use libSQL without Turso. And I'm not gonna. Unfortunately, there are two companies in particular that I know that may have use of that. I don't think I am at liberty to disclose who they are. But we know of some. But I also want to clarify that we also don't put a lot of effort into making that happen. So Turso as a company, this all happened in October 2022. October 2022, we launched this fork of SQLite. And then by February 2023, we had Turso the managed service up, because we are, unlike the Drizzle folks, we are a VC-backed company. So we fairly early on, we had to give this answer to ourselves and our investors and our employees and like, how do you make money out of this? And it's not by being just a open source SQLite clone or fork or whatever that you run on device. You have to have something. And so all of our efforts, again, it's open source, so people use it, and we know of people using it as just a replacement for SQLite. We add a couple of things to that fork that have nothing to do with the Turso platform. One of them being vector search. So you have native vector search in the libSQL build.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I know of some people using it, but
wow.
I want to explain real quick for people listening. So vector search is the ability to query vector what do you call them? Vector objects that are close to each other, which is pretty cool. I know that it's probably a lot more than that, but the idea is with AI right now, a lot of people are creating what's called embeddings, and embeddings are sort of a numerical representation of the data that's in it, right? And if you want to, I could take like a whole bunch of photos or a whole bunch of text and convert them to embeddings. And if you want to find similar text, not just based on the words inside of it, but
the meaning, the semantic meaning on what those things are.
Yeah. Semantic meaning, exactly. Or like pictures of what is in the photo, etc. That is really cool. And very early on, we saw a lot of just like custom vector databases. And I think you could tell me, are they getting their lunch eaten by just like regular databases like SQLite, adding it as a feature?
I think the answer is unequivocally yes. And
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm hoping, obviously people will disagree. And if you talk to somebody from a vector database, I will expect them to disagree. They're financially motivated to disagree, which is fine.
Yeah.
But I don't think vector is. Look, I worked in a NoSQL database for 8 years before that, which is a columnar store. I'm fairly familiar with NoSQL, non-SQL databases, by and large, grouped together as NoSQL. And some of the things that those databases do can be quite complex. Think, for example, in time series. To have a good time series database, you have to have a completely different on-disk representation. Things are not represented as relationships, they're represented as series, and then you have to be able to very quickly do aggregations across those series, which is a completely different set of queries than a relational database would do. And those things are very, very, very complicated. You have companies, Datadog being one example. At the end of the day, they're just a giant time series databases. You have things like InfluxDB. There are very complicated technologies that allow you to query time series. Vector is not like that. Vector is relatively simple. And I think now that everybody is looking into that because of the AI boom, turns out it's not that complicated. So if it's not that complicated, what happens is that all of the databases just adopt it, like the same way they adopted JSON as a format. And this is happening with Postgres. Postgres is doing a lot of vector. This is happening with us. So we allow, for example, without any extensions, you don't need any extensions. You just build libSQL, and our build of libSQL has vector, which is now available on the Turso platform, but it came first through the open source. And people have been using, one of the cases that I am aware of people using libSQL, nothing to do with Turso, is exactly for vectors. So you have this vector thing that is just there, right?
Interesting. You had mentioned that your prior experience was in a NoSQL database, and now you're working on SQLite. Why the shift to relational databases?
I'm not going to say that I don't believe in NoSQL anymore. It's just that I don't believe in NoSQL anymore as your default choice. And so what I found in the market is that around 2010, you just had, like, if you had anything remotely serious, you would go for NoSQL. And the reason for that is that the SQL databases didn't scale very well, and you didn't really have a lot of hardware. Your phone today probably has more compute and storage capacity than a server had in 2010. So you had to scale out. And people sometimes make fun of that and say, no, you didn't really. But reality is that if you had any website in 2010 that had any mild capacity, you had to scale it out. And Mongo was at the time the best choice, and to do that. Like the SQL databases, you would have to manually shard it, which is not a pleasant experience. So you had you kind of had to do it. But fast forward to today, the hardware advanced a lot. So your phone has the same capacity that a server had back then. But a server, you can go on AWS today and rent a behemoth of a machine with a click. And that's fine. So you don't have to necessarily scale out anymore. Also, the SQL databases got better. SQLite itself got a lot better. SQLite, the software in SQLite today is not the same as it was 5 years ago. It has the infamous journal mode before, which was forced you to have a single writer. Today, SQLite does not. Back then, SQLite, every write that you do in the database took a full lock. You could do nothing else when you're writing. Today, you still have the single writer model, but you can still read while you are writing, which means, okay, that's good enough for the vast majority of read mostly workloads. So the software work improved. Postgres improved as well. MySQL improved as well. And the hardware improved. So you don't have to do NoSQL anymore. And I think what happens is that NoSQL ceased to be the default and became this specialized thing that some use cases for some things will need. And I was just more interested in going for the core, and that's why I landed here.
Yeah, cool. I want to talk about the whole multi-tenancy or per tenant database, because this is something I've been hearing a lot about recently, where people say one of the benefits of SQLite is instead of having one big database, you can literally give every single user their own database, which seems cool. But then also I'm like, well, then that seems like a bit of a maintenance headache and whatnot. You want to talk about that?
Awesome. So look, this is great, because when we going back to our history and how we forked this database, we came up with the managed platform almost immediately after, which means it wasn't as good as it is today. It was essentially like, okay, now we have this thing that's doing well. Our fork of SQLite got 1,500 GitHub stars in a week, which is we decided, okay, so we're going to go all into this. And we had the platform right after it. And one of the advantages that we knew we were going to have is that SQLite can be a lot more affordable than any other SQL database. So this is still something that underpins what we do. You can have a lot more for your dollar with SQLite, and this is true for every SQLite offering, than you would have for other databases. So we offered people at the time 3 databases for free, so you could come and you could just sign up on Turso, get an account, and you would get 3 databases. But our users, who were at the time on the private beta, kept asking us, why 3? Like, why not 10,000? Just why? Like, I have this pattern so the users themselves, as they came, but kept telling us that this pattern was a pattern that they saw done on SQLite. Not necessarily those users were adopting this pattern, but they were saying, I like the fact that this exists. I would love to experiment with that pattern. So why can't you, if it's just a SQLite file, why can't you give me 10,000 databases? And the technical answer at the time was that because the way we architected the service in 2 months so we could release it, every database was in a VM. So we didn't have any multi-tenant capabilities. And what we've done later is that, okay, now we build the level of isolation. SQLite itself is really good with that. So SQLite, you can determine how much memory maximum you're going to use. By the way, our vector search implementation, we don't use the fastest algorithms. We use the most memory predictable algorithms exactly to be able to keep offering this multi-tenancy thing with vector. Okay. And SQLite already isolates fairly well. Then we change our architecture so that now we have a big VM with a lot of SQLite files on it. Now it can offer you like those 10,000 databases, which is what we offer for $29 a month. So for $29 a month, you have access to 10,000 databases. For free, you have access to 500 databases, which you can use for side projects. If you have 500 side projects, some people do, in fact. If you know,
Wes and I, yeah.
And that's fine. But you can also use for multi-tenancy. But once we release multi-tenancy, and look, this is what you should do as a startup. You're always listening and iterating. So once we released multi-tenancy, now you can have 10,000 databases. People kept telling us, okay, that's great, but if I have to change the schema of those databases, I'm kind of screwed, because that sounds like a tremendous maintenance burden. And then we added capabilities to our server to do transactional schema changes. In what we have today, we have a concept in Turso called schema databases and child databases. So when you create a database, you can, if you say nothing is just a database, but you can create a schema database, and then you can create child databases that are connected to the schema databases. When you change the schema of the schema database, it propagates atomically to the child databases, right? So you can essentially do that schema change in a single point, and it gets propagated to the other databases. So part of what we do is making that model, making the model feasible, which starts with, here are the 10,000 databases for $29 to begin with.
Yeah.
So it's, and building the machinery on top to make the model work and make it, seeing where the pain points are, and building infrastructure to go around it, right?
Okay. And why would you want 10,000 databases? Like, why would it make sense to put every single user in its own database?
The first thing, I want to clarify is that this is not what Turso is. This is one thing that Turso allows, and I really want to stress that, because some people understand that, like, if I don't do multi-tenancy, then Turso is not for me, and that's not true. If you can, like, it's not because you can create 100,000 databases doesn't mean you have to. So if you prefer to put everything on a single database, do it by all means. We don't mind. You have all of those databases. I'm not going to take offense if you use only one. That's fine. But you can. And what I see is that some architectures are made simpler by doing multi-tenancy. And those are the architectures that I believe should do multi-tenancy. I don't believe, as I've been calling recently, hyper-tenancy, because you don't even need those databases to be long-lived. You can create a database that lasts for an hour to host a session. And then when that is done, you shut it down. So you really can go take multi-tenancy, because those databases also come online in 500 milliseconds, right? So in 500 milliseconds, your database is there, lasts for an hour, shut it down, that's fine. But some architectures are made simpler by this. Imagine, for example, that you are a company in the financial space. You can have you can have a database per client of yours. You can encrypt that database with different keys, and lots of things in your backend become a lot simpler because the isolation is now guaranteed at the database level. If you are GDPR compliant and a user requests a copy of their data, it's trivial now to extract a copy of the database. You can be more aggressive with your backend optimizations, because you know that nothing that you do will cause by accident you to mix data from different customers, right? So a lot of architectures, and what we see a lot is people in the healthcare and finance space being heavily interested by this, because those are heavy compliance-based industries in which data segregation is very important. And then they say, look, if I can guarantee this at the database level already, a lot of my backend become a lot simpler.
Yeah. So offhand, you had mentioned that SQLite being cheaper was a big factor in some of the direction you went. What exactly makes SQLite a cheaper to run than a traditional MySQL or Postgres?
First of all, the 20 years of optimizations in making it runnable in toasters. The toaster thing is mostly a joke, but at the same time, it isn't.
Yeah, for sure.
I bet some toaster out there runs SQLite. We're now on the AI craze. You might remember a couple of years ago, you had the IoT craze, in which you had to have smart everything. And I'm sure at that point, somebody came up with a toaster that was a smart toaster and runs SQLite. I am pretty much on the camp of I don't have smart stuff in my home, and the very few things that are smart devices on my home, I keep a gun around. If they make a noise that I don't recognize, I'll shoot it. Don't trust that. Don't trust that too much. But look, it runs everywhere, and it has like 20 years of optimizations to make it runnable in those environments, which are low memory. So at the end of the day, a database costs as much as the resources needed to fulfill the queries. So if you use fewer resources to fulfill that query, it costs you less money. So there is a general sense in which SQLite is just cheaper, because again, it's simpler. It will do fewer things, but those things it will do at the same speed or faster, but using a lot fewer resources. So that's number one. And number two, because it allows for those architectures, being just a file, at the end of the day, SQLite is just a file. Allow for those architectures where, for example, if I had to give every user a Postgres database, it would cost me, being charitable, $1 a month just to keep the database online in a container running. Even serverless Postgres that you see today, what they do is that they bring compute up. That compute stay up for 5 minutes to handle one request, and then it shuts down. SQLite being just a file, the file is always there. If you send an HTTP request, that gets served. There's no buffering there's no extra anything. You send this HTTP request, you serve this one request into that file, and that's it. You didn't have to bring compute, you don't need Kubernetes, you don't need any of that. So you end up having a cheaper infrastructure to run. You end up having a query that uses fewer resources to be fulfilled, and that translates into essentially a cheaper offering. It's not all about being cheap as well. We also have a couple of features that I think are very unique to Turso and are enabled by the SQLite model. One of them, which is my favorite, in fact, is what we call embedded replicas. So embedded replicas allow, you have your Turso database accessible over HTTP, but I can now create a replica of that database in a file that sits in your own server. And that file is kept up to date by the Turso server. So now you can read from a file locally in 200 microseconds instead of going into a server that is 10 milliseconds away. So now you are faster, right? As well as cheaper. So I think that the file-based model of SQLite and how resource efficient and memory bounded it is to serve your queries allow us to build a service that has all of those properties. But if you need none of those properties, you don't need this level of replication and microsecond level latency, you don't need multi-tenancy, you end up with a service that allows you to do 1 billion reads per month for free. Because it doesn't cost me too much to serve those reads, right?
Wow. So when you have something that is like seemingly so like cheap to run, is it the strategy for building a business off of that? Is that all into like what kind of novel things can we do that other folks can't do? Is that the approach to take something that is like,
yes,
trivial to run? Yeah.
Yes, because at the end of the day, we're gonna make a little bit. We're only gonna make a little bit of money because we charge you only a little bit. Is not something that gets a lot of people in the venture capital industry excited. so you have to build a really big business. You need to transform that into features that are themselves very valuable, and they're only possible because you drop the baseline cost. All right. So there are many examples in the industry across time in which something that was very expensive now becomes very cheap, and then allows you to build things in a different way, and allows you to build things in ways that you wanted to do before, but wasn't possible. One example that comes to mind is Git. I am a little bit of a dinosaur. As I mentioned in the beginning, I was in the Linux kernel as one of the core contributors, as my co-founder was from essentially 2002 to 2012. Wow. And in the middle of that period, there was this thing called Git that was written by Linus. And the whole story of how it came to be was actually quite interesting. But one of the things, if you're not familiar with the landscape at the time, the dominant version control system in the open source was Subversion and CVS. They were like some people use CVS, some people use Subversion. And creating branches and merging branches in those tools were really complicated and humanly expensive procedures. Like you had to stop what you're doing. You had to go and sync with your team. Oh, I'm going to merge something now. Like everybody, right? Everybody beware. I need to branch. So you need to think about how I'm going to branch this. And one of the things that Linus said a lot about Git at the time is like, hey, look, just creating a branch now takes 200 milliseconds, and you just do this, and that's just a hash, and that's your branch. And like, once this becomes trivially cheaper, you can have a completely different workflow that would have been impossible with this other tool. And I think of databases in the same way. What we want to do is you can the same way you can still use Git in the exact same way you would have used Subversion or CVS back then. New workflows were enabled. And in a sense, we want to do the same with Turso. You can still use Turso as a SQL database as you used before. That's fine, and the baseline works. But because the cost of a database essentially drops to zero, the cost of creating a new database and maintaining a new database drops to zero, there are new things that you can do that you just couldn't do before. And that allows you to have new architectures, those new architectures based on hypertenancy, based on like very capular replication inside your mobile device, inside your own server, that allows for architectures that just were not possible before, right?
Mm. So one thing we really like about, we use on the Syntax website, we use MySQL and we use PlanetScale to host it, which they just had a bit of a rug pull the other 6 months ago or so. Like they took away the free plan, they jacked up the price on everything. So I'm here to tell you to please don't do that to us as well on Turso. But despite that, I still really do like PlanetScale because of their like branching feature where it's like, I want to work on a feature. I'll just like take a fork of the database so that I can work with the most up-to-date data and then sort of submit like a pull request for the schema updates as well. Is there anything like that? Like what's the flow for that when you're working with SQLite?
The pull request thing we don't, which is something that we want to get you in the future. But the branching we do. And this is one of the things that, look, our company is 14 people. And this is probably one of the smallest heavy hitter database players that you've ever seen. Like any other database company out there is at least 5 times our size. And again, SQLite is part of the reason why we can do this. Because do you know how our branching feature works? We copy the file. That's it.
So that rules. That's so simple.
There is a lot that you can do when you have a fundamentally and intrinsically simpler architecture that allows you to do, like any other database, you have pages and then you have LSM trees and B trees that are very directly, and if you want to branch based on that, you have to be aware of this whole structure. And we wanted to implement copy, like you can just copy the file. And does that take long and that uses up a lot of space? No, because the XFS file system has copy and write capabilities itself. So you just back this up by XFS and then you copy the file and that's it. It takes the same, right? It is just a file. So this architecture is very beautiful. But you can at any time in Turso create a new database based on another database, which is a branch. But the reason we even say like create a database based on another database is that you can create that based on any point in time that this other database was. So you can say, give me a copy of this database as it was like yesterday, right? Just and then you at 3 p.m. Pacific, and there you go. You've got a copy of the database at that point in time, right?
Does that work for like rollbacks as well? Because I noticed I was in Cloudflare, and they literally allow you to scroll back in time to like literally any point in time, which is wild to me, and it's all instant.
We can do that too. However, we have a product decision on top of that I still believe it was the right choice for us. In fact, I would love to know your opinion since you're as users, but we don't roll back to the same URL. Because the problem there is that like some people just shoot themselves in the foot. So we give you a new URL with that database in that point in time, and then you can go verify if this is really what you wanted, and then you switch that URL. So you can do that, but
it's kind of the fix forward instead of roll back idea. A lot of people in Git are like that as well. Is don't roll it back, fix forward.
Yeah.
So that is the only difference. Like I can give you a snapshot of your database at any point in time in the last day if you're a free user, in the last 10 days if you are a $9 a month user, in the last month if you are a $29 a month user, and more if you are on Pro and Enterprise. But I give you a new URL with that database, and now you can go verify and see if things are the way you want, and switch to that URL if not, you just discard it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking like how awesome it would be to how much more you can store given the prices of this right now, because like I think right now our database is 1.7 gigs, which it's relatively small. And like that is a pretty small database in terms of the pricing for Turso.
Yes.
So we could store a lot more stuff. Like sometimes you think, we're not going to store absolutely everything because that takes up too much space, But as the cost of storing things goes down, you think, oh, what more can we store?
Goes back to that conversation we were having about architecture. The thing with multi-tenancy is exactly the same thing. We're not just after the people who are doing multi-tenancy. Let me give you a couple of examples on how driving the cost of a database to zero allows you to rethink your architecture. You just yourself came up with one. I would store things that I would not otherwise store. I'll give you two more. The first one is just a hyper-tenancy story. You know what? I can get a database per session of my user in the web. I can get a database per user of every episode of my podcast gets its own database. That's fine. If you simplify things in architecture, you can do this. And the third one is every time you are thinking, you know what? I need to be very careful how I construct my tables and how I query my tables, because I don't want to have an N+1 problem in which I'm querying the database all the time. This is going to end up taking like many seconds and my API is now busted. Look, if you replicate that into a server and you're now reading from a local file, query away. Away. Your queries are now free. First of all, because we don't charge you for their queries, we charge you for the sync. So we charge you to keep the data in sync, but you now can do as many queries as your heart desire completely for free. Both in terms of cost and pretty much time as well, because fire 10,000 queries and each query takes 100 microseconds. That's fine,
Yeah. I've been doing a lot with local data on device, and it changes the way you think about saving data, and I think that's such a powerful way to be. It empowers you to do more with the data. You don't have to worry about the cost associated. Does this also inform the edge functionality as well? Is the edge functionality of Turso, is that related at all to the way that we're talking about SQLite here as being a file?
Yes. I just want to clarify that I regret using that word that we used very heavily in the beginning. And in our defense, I mean, Pekka and I come from a very different background. And Edge for us was just the story that we wanted to tell by positioning ourselves as an Edge database is the story in a sense that we are achieving today with embedded replication. Push your data as close as possible to you, make those latencies very small to non-existent, and that can change the way you think. However, what happened is that especially in the JavaScript community in particular, but not only, but in a special way, that word got a very unfortunate meaning, because what people came to understand Edge as being something that is not compatible with Node.js, which was mind-boggling to me, because Edge in my mind is a concept that is geographical.
Been responsible for that slightly.
and we all, this happens, just people, once you put a term out there, like people understand the way they understand, and like I'm not assigning blame to any specific individual or entity or anything, but the fact of the matter is that we had many potential customers with whom I would talk. They would say, I love the idea what you're doing, but I'm not using the Edge at all. I like Node.js, so I'm not going to use Turso. So it was a word that was very confusing. But what we wanted to do with our initial Edge positioning is this idea that, look, you can have a database that is incredibly fast with 0 to either fully zero or very low latency by replicating SQLite massively. And the reason we knew we could replicate SQLite massively is exactly because this file-based, low-cost nature. Because if you're replicating any other database, you now have to keep servers running to serve those requests from those other locations, which may or may not have a lot of requests. So imagine, for example, you have a couple of users in the United States and some users in Australia. Those users in Australia, they show up for 8 hours a day. Sometimes, because maybe your business sells to Australia, but not that much, you're not going to put a replica there because it's going to be very expensive to keep that replica running all the time and up to date and synced, etc. But if I can keep the file in sync, so there's some bandwidth cost in there, which is fine. It's not the most expensive part. But if you're not querying that replica, you're not paying anything, then that's fine, right? Just it allows you to have this architecture. And that's what we wanted to do with the edge. I think we realized this vision even better with our embedded replication. And the way we think about this today is like, look, if you are using a serverless platform, then use our edge replicas, because you now have an HTTP accessible thing that you can access with the same latency from Australia, United States, Brazil, Canada, Europe, whatever you are. If you have a server, a VPS, an AWS server, anything like that, you're actually better off. Don't use our edge replicas. I can offer you one better. Just replicate that inside your own server. Put in your user's mobile phone. So you have 10,000 users. Keep a database per user and replicate the database individually to each of their phones and encrypt it with different keys. So this is even better than just having 5 or 6 locations that we offer that you can query from with low latency, which is still how you use it on serverless, because on serverless, you don't have a file system where to replicate that file. But if you do, that's what we suggest.
Oh, man. Okay, I got 2 questions after that. So like the first one is, if I have a database in New Jersey and I have an edge function which could run anywhere over the world, my serverless function or edge function or whatever is going to connect to the closest version of that database, right? So if the serverless function is running in Australia, it's going to try to find the Australia one. And if I update any of those databases, they all sync with each other. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, the Turso model is we want to keep things very simple for a couple of reasons. One of them is so that we can keep fighting the big guys with a 14 people team. But also because we believe in simplicity. We truly believe in simplicity as a goal. It's easier to cognitively understand what's going on. So we have a model in which there is a single primary. So all your writes are going to go to your main region, which is likely like New Jersey in your case. But your reads can be served from any other database. And then we have something special on top, which I think makes it usable, which is read your write semantics. So in the same client, if you write something, you are guaranteed to read that write. Because what a lot of databases that go for massive replication, they do, like our previous NoSQL database, is that you don't really have any guarantees. You read, you write, and you read, and you may read what you wrote or not, and eventual consistency. In the future, those things will coalesce. But with Turso, in the same client that you created, if you write, you're going to read that data back. But a new client that is just getting started now, that client can read data in the past because the data hasn't reached that replica yet. And the reason that works well is that this is the same consistency model that a transaction offers you. If you start a transaction now, other transactions will come in the middle and update the database, but you will still read the data as if it were when you started the transaction.
Okay.
So you have that. But your writes are always going to be slower in Australia than they are in New Jersey, assuming, of course, your main database is in New Jersey. And the other way around.
Okay. That makes sense. And because a lot of people always say, like, edge functions are not a great idea because your database is always going to be your bottleneck, right? If you have a database.
Yeah, Turso changes that. Turso changes that radically. You can just...
And the other question I had was, you just said, well, if you have a server or if you have like like somebody's phone or whatever, instead of connecting to the database, just put the file on the server themselves. And that Turso does that. Like I'm able to just like, if I have a 1 gig database and I'm running a DigitalOcean droplet, I could just download this SQLite database, run it on my droplet, and it will sync with the rest.
That's right.
Wow.
And in that same regard, you had mentioned embedded replicas.
That's the name of this feature.
Yeah.
Embedded replica.
So you had mentioned it could be stored on device and that will sync, like we just said. Will this like conflict resolution happen if the user's offline, comes back online? Will it sync correctly?
So I want to clarify something. At the moment, we're actually planning to change that, and I'm happy to tell you the future roadmap in here, which will answer your question fully. But at the moment, they are called embedded replicas. So it is you don't write to them. You write to the main database. So you still need what you can do with this model is that you can do offline reads. You have the copy of the database on your device. Then let's say you have something that's a use case that we have here, like a farmer that has a tablet that has like a schedule, and they have to go in the fields. There's no internet connection in the fields, so you can still see all the data in your database there. But if you make changes, like those changes, you have to be online to make the changes. But you can still see the data. You can still see the data online, so, which is why like we want to change that, and we in fact have it on our roadmap by October this year to change it to allow writes in the replica as well. And now you need some form of conflict resolution, right? But the one of the reasons we started with just read replicas is that it is the simple thing to do. You just get a copy, and now you can read those things from your DigitalOcean droplet in microseconds.
Wow. Yeah, give me that offline sync, and that's my dream service right there. So sick.
Can you do it from like, we've been doing a whole bunch of shows on like offline first as well. And like, what does the story look like if your server's offline, if your DigitalOcean is offline? Can you put the database in the client or put it in WASM or something like that?
No, if your DigitalOcean droplet is offline, it's the same story. You can read from it. You will not be able to write. Because I want to clarify something as well. That all of this is transparent in Turso. So the way it looks in code is that you create a client. You define a period for the sync, let's say 5 seconds, 1 second, 1 minute. And then what happens is that if you sync more often, that's more expensive, right? Because you're transferring frames more often and you have less coalescing opportunities. And if you're syncing less often, this is cheaper, but the data is less fresh. That's the trade-off that you make. And on the client, you call, let's use Drizzle as an example, like db.execute, and then you put a insert query. That works. The only thing is that write will now go through the network. So you don't have to do anything special in the client. The write is just slow. But then when you do db.execute select, that comes back in 100 microseconds. So that's the only, like it's all transparent, but one of them is slower and the writes are faster. The writes are slower and the reads are faster. When you go into conflict resolution, when you go into like, okay, now I need to allow writes to happen in the local endpoint, then the only way to do this is to make things less transparent, because SQL, it has the asset model, has the transaction model. It's not like a NoSQL eventual consistent database that you always write in like idempotent mutations. That's not how SQL works. So you need to account for the fact that somebody else may have written something before you did that invalidates the transaction that you had. And our approach to that will be essentially like you as the user defines what happens in this case. So if we detect a conflict, we call a callback that you defined, that in which you decide what to do. Like, so do you ignore this data, or do you try to write it again, making sure that the values still make sense? Like whatever you decide to do, you do it. But it has to be, the trade-off there is that it has to be less transparent. You have to come and decide what to do if your writes fail, right?
Yeah, I think that's all right. You know, I'm doing a lot of this stuff with Replicash right now, and you got to handle everything. You know, it's just sending you patch messages and all that stuff. And so it's not like a huge problem to understand what's going on. It's funny when we were looking through the Replicas docs, and it's like there's a whole massive 4 pages on conflict merging strategies, whether you're versioning tables, whether you're just overwriting, whatever. So it's all very situational dependent and complex. Is there anything about Turso specifically that we didn't get to before maybe we take some questions that are not Turso related?
Look, I think we cover, for me, if you ask me, what is the thing that really shines about Turso and what is the thing that people should come to Turso for, there are 3 things. First of them, just how incredibly easy it is. In fact, that is the one thing, the one thing that we did not talk too much about.
Yeah.
The way things work with Turso is that you create a client, and I understand most of your audience will be a JavaScript audience by and large.
Yeah.
So you create a client using Drizzle or using Prisma or just using the raw client, libSQL client TypeScript. And in that client, you're going to pass a bunch of options. One of the options is the URL. And then you have a token, you have a sync period, you have the sync URL, you have extra things, but the main thing is the URL. And if you pass a file, that is just local SQLite. I mean, technically speaking, that's libSQL, the fork. So you can do vector search, you can do all of those things. But when you pass a file, it's just this. That's a file. And one of the things that people love about Turso, and if you go in our community, our Discord community is discord.gg/Turso, that is how a lot of people develop. You can develop your application in a file. You do not have to connect to the Turso service to develop. You don't have to spin a container to develop. You don't have to keep bringing databases up and down on CI to develop. You can just put the flat file there. So the developer experience of developing with SQLite is absurdly good. And we keep this. And when you want to connect to the Turso service, then you can replace that file URL with the Turso URL. Or you don't, or you keep the file URL and add a sync URL, and now you're reading from the local file, right? So one of the things that is very good about what we offer is just hey, start with a file. It's all you need. It's the simplest getting started thing possible, but then there is a very smooth on-ramp to use this in production, which is why our messaging today is not, even though we do replication very well, even though we do hyper-tenancy very well, the messaging is SQLite for production. Is you start with the SQLite idea, we start with the file, and then you get your on-ramp to run this thing in production with replication, with backups, with point-in-time recovery, with schema changes automated in a single point. So what we're doing essentially is adding all of those features and functionality that allows you to get the good stuff about SQLite. The stuff that people love, which is, again, file-based DX and local reads and multi-tenancy, hyper-tenancy, as we've been calling it, and put us in production. So.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had a quick question. You had mentioned that you had done a lot of work on the Linux kernel. I'm just curious about that. What was that like?
So first of all, that was a long time ago. I started as I suspect I know. One of the things you want to know is, correct me if I'm wrong, is people really that harsh are people really that harsh in the Linux kernel? So let me start with a story. That was around 2003. I was a college student, and I was very interested in open source, and I was very interested in low-level systems. And Linux was just the perfect intersection of this. And at the time, by and large, people do not believe in open source, right? Open source was the thing that if you do this, your kids are going to starve because, it's free and blah, blah, blah. So there I was, and I really loved it. I didn't care about that because I didn't have kids. So if they starve, they don't even exist to begin with. It's just me. So there I was, and I very proudly found what I consider to be, it wasn't even a bug. It was hey, we could reshuffle this code and make things a little bit better. And I sent my first contribution to the Linux kernel. Again, it was either late 2003 or early 2004. I don't remember. I actually tried to find this message on archives, and they only go as far back as 2005, so it's not there. But then this guy that was very high profile in the Linux kernel, He was the maintainer of all the virtual file system interface, all viral, with whom I interacted later in more pleasant ways. He responds to my first contribution as a 21-year-old guy, like just trying to understand software, learning C by reading the Linux kernel source code, and here's my contribution. And his response was, "This is the worst piece of code I've ever seen in my life. You managed to introduce 3 bugs in a single line of code, and people like you should never be allowed to get close to a keyboard again." So that was my welcome to the Linux kernel. And in a sense, I was happy. In a sense, I was blessed because it did not get, it doesn't get much worse than that. And that was already like my first impression. So things actually got better after that, right? Just, but that was that was my entry point. And look, I think I don't follow Linux that much these days. The development and maybe things got better. I think I have, when I was leaving, I think things were already getting better. But the thing is that at the time, I actually appreciated that. You may find like a Stockholm syndrome, or maybe I'm a masochist or whatnot. But the way I saw the tech industry back then was like this very fake place in which like nobody's telling the truth at any time. And like I was starting to see like the folks that were later in college, like 4th year, 5th year, starting like their internships, like they were all wearing like nice clothes and speaking on a very corporate fake way. And I just consider that attitude at the time to be just a breath of fresh air. I mean, like this person is telling me that I should never get close to a keyboard again because he thinks I should never get close to a keyboard again. And in a sense, I did not like hearing that, but I like the fact that he was not telling me, you know what, I wished in future contributions we should strive for a more synergetic approach to get our OKRs in a better place. So I found that refreshing in the beginning, if that makes sense. And later I got tired of it, but I found it refreshing.
Yeah.
Just,
Do you use Linux as a desktop right
no,
now?
I don't. No. I just when I joined Datadog, I got a Mac, and then I just got used to the Mac. And my co-founder was actually the maintainer of the memory management subsystem for Linux at the time. We've worked together in the Linux kernel for around 5 years, and he also uses a Mac. So we're always joking that, we made the sausage, which is why we don't eat the sausage. But I still have a bunch of Linux servers. I use Android for phones. It's just that like a lot of things got simpler on especially now that I don't code that much anymore. Like I'm just managing the company. A lot of things got simpler for me on a Mac, so just keep using the Mac.
I feel that.
Cool. Let's move into the last section of the podcast here, which is 2 sections. We have our sick pick and our shameless plug. Did you come prepared with those?
I am terrible at being prepared for anything. So I did not.
Anything in your life that you're a big fan of?
It's giving you joy.
Coding related or not?
Man, what in my life gives me joy? That I'm happy that my wife is not listening to the podcast, because she's always complaining like nothing brings you joy. You are probably the worst person. So she's just if she's watching this, which I'm sure she's not, because she's not a techie. Thanks be to God. She will be essentially saying like nothing brings you joy. But. You know what? This is not a sick thing, but I want to share something which again is related, if I may. The other day, I found out that I suffer from a condition called aphantasia. Have you heard of this before?
No.
I feel like I've heard of it, but I'd have to look up. Yeah.
So all my life, people would tell me things like, "Oh, visualize this and picture this in your mind and make it like if you're trying to do meditation, for example." Which maybe would be my sick pick. I was trying the other day to do meditation, etc., and I completely failed. And I think because of this, people try to get you to visualize those things very vividly, so you can be transported into that environment. I cannot visualize anything, And for all my life, I was always thinking maybe people, when they say visualize, they mean something else, not really visualize being a metaphor. And then I found out that actually apparently 4% of the population are like me. We can't visualize S, right? Nothing. Like my mind does not have pictures. If I close my eyes and I'm asked to imagine an apple, I don't see an apple. I can describe an apple to you. I can remember what an apple is, but I don't see a apple. And then my wife and I were, and apparently I learned recently, like 2 months ago, that no, it's not a metaphor. Apparently normal human beings can visualize the damn apple, and I'm the one who can't. And there's something wrong with me. So my joy recently have been trying to figure out more about this condition. And if there is any way that I can still do like meditation and things that will require visualization, despite the fact that I suffer from this, which apparently there's no fix. It's just like being left-handed. It's what it is. You're just born like this, and there you go. Not that sick. In fact, actually, if this is a condition, this is technically a sick pick. Except that there's nothing that I can do to sickness pick. Except there's nothing that I can do to cure this apparently. But I've been reading a lot about it, and I've been finding a lot of fun in trying to understand how the mind works, how the brain works, and why is it that I cannot see a apple at all. While apparently, if you guys close your eyes now, statistically speaking, you will see an apple if I tell you, and I don't.
Yeah, I think that is a sick pick though, because you know what, my wife's a doctor of psychology, and one of the things that she talks to, even with parents, is it's not about the label that you get; it's about the empowerment you get to understand yourself, because you have that bigger picture now of why you're like this and that. So it is funny because parents sometimes because she's mostly testing children. They get wrapped up in like, I don't want to put these labels on my kid. And it's not about the label. It's about being able to understand, what's going on. So,
that was liberating. Yeah. That was liberating for me because again, all my life, I thought that this was just a metaphor. When people say visualize yourself on the beach, I say, oh, that must be a metaphor because if I close my eyes, I see nothing. And this understanding that other human beings are different and how they're different and what is the baseline allows me, for example, to try, because I was always fascinated by meditation, but I never succeeded in attaining any meditative state. And I don't know if I ever will, but at least now I know that if I am to, I have to try a different way. I can't just try the same way I've always been told, because it always involves some level of visualization, and I just know I'm physically incapable of doing it, right? So I have to find another way, which is...
Yeah, that resonates a lot with me. I mean, I for a long time, I'm a really bad reader. I have dyslexia. And for a long time, I was trying to force it. I feel everyone says you should be reading. I feel like I should be reading. And then at some point, once I realized it's not good for me to try to do that, I just embraced audiobooks completely. And I don't even try to read books anymore. And it's made my life so much better. Yeah. So just understanding yourself. Is there anything you would like to plug? Any events coming up, anything specifically, or just anything you'd like to plug at all?
I will be in August in Park City, Utah for React Rally.
Cool.
So again, please be gentle with me if you're there. I'm not a front-end developer. Again, I'm a Linux guy turned database engineer, now turned database company CEO. So I do not understand React. But I always like to be, those are, we have a lot of users of Turso coming from those communities. I think Turso is a tool that empowers developers to use their own databases, right? Just that without having, imagine that, which is, by the way, one of the things that we do not talk too much about. Imagine but you hinted at this, Wes. Like you are a front-end developer. You don't understand databases very well, at least not as much as the core database people in the company. Turso will allow you to create a replica of the database and operate in that replica without disrupting the main service, right? So one of the things that we do want to allow people to do is like have this flexibility and go wild. Don't fear your database anymore. So I'm always trying to get close to those communities, understand what matters to folks like you, so we can provide those things to you through Turso. So I'm going to be on React Rally in August. And the end of August, I am attending the Laravel conference. I hope you guys are not mad at me for playing both ways. I do.
No, we love
no.
Laravel. Yeah.
I've spoken at that conference many times, and a bunch of Sentry folks are going to be there as well.
Awesome. And Lambos for them, and Westbos for the JavaScript community. I'm happy to play that way. But but I'm going to be there. And then in September, Kent Dodds is organizing a very select conference, which is invitation only. There's going to be a 2-day conference in a hotel in Provo, Utah. And I'm going to be at that conference as well. We at Turso are sponsoring that conference. So like, if you want to chat, and if you are in any of those 3 places, feel free to come chat. It's always a pleasure for me to chat about anything really, from Aphantasia to databases to Turso in the Linux kernel. I would love to connect with folks that are there.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I really illuminated to me like what makes Turso different, because it's easy to look at things and say, oh, it's another cloud database, but it's been really awesome to dive into what makes it all so special. So thank you so much for all that. It was really great getting to chat.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, folks.
Thanks a
Awesome.
lot. Peace.
Peace.